Every collector's worst fear just came true in upstate New York. Walter Kohl spent 6 decades rescuing forgotten motorcycles, only to lose everything in one day. Bureaucrats seized his life's work, let it rot, and vandals torched it. But what investigators found hidden beneath the wreckage left everyone speechless. The 9-hour pilgrimage. With scraps of information and a handful of vague coordinates, David, a cruise collector and enthusiast, planned a 9-hour road trip to Lockport, a town in Niagara County, New York, all because of a picture he saw of the collection. The destination, 71 Gooding Street. It was a shot in the dark, built on rumors and whispers. Yet for David, this wasn't optional. It was a calling. He gathered 2 close friends, people who understood this wasn't just about motorcycles, it was about discovery. The drive wound through landscapes both scenic and industrial. As they approached Lockport, anticipation built with every mile marker. David's thoughts alternated between hope and dread. He imagined the building standing as it had in the photos, untouched, stuffed to the rafters with machines that hadn't seen daylight in half a century. Then he imagined a wrecking crew tearing it all down before he could even arrive. Either possibility felt real. Lockport greeted them with rusted bridges and the slow churn of the Erie Canal. This was old American industry at rest, a place where steel once met sweat and machines had real purpose. 71 Gooding Street stood just a block away from the canal lock, partially obscured by trees and crumbling brick. Train tracks ran parallel to it, offering a backdoor approach with minimal attention. We hung out by the lock for a little while, watching boats being raised and lowered, David later recalled. I was casing the building like a bank robber. As they followed the train tracks to the back entrance, no one spoke, because what they saw when they finally reached the building made one thing clear. This wasn't some local junkyard. This was sacred ground, the crumbling Cathedral of steel. Time had not been kind to the building. 3 conjoined warehouses stretched across the back of the property, their metal roofs sagging under decades of weather and weight. David and his friends slipped through the tall grass, hearts pounding with anticipation. There was no mistaking it now. This was the place from the photographs. Nature had begun reclaiming it. Ivy wrapped around rusted hinges, broken windows framed the sky like cracked picture frames, and graffiti-marked walls that had not seen human care in decades. The basement entrance yawned open behind a half-collapsed wall. David descended first, flashlight flickering. He stepped into what felt like another world. Dozens of rusted bikes were strewn across the wet concrete, buried in leaves and dust. Some had collapsed entirely, their wheels no longer circular, their spokes resembling bent rib cages. Others sat upright as if still waiting for a rider to return. Each level of the building told a story. The lower floors held the worst of the decay. Moisture and cold had gnawed at the bikes for what seemed like a generation. Upstairs was a different story. Wooden staircases creaked and groaned beneath their weight. Some steps were missing entirely. The air was heavy with mildew and age. As they reached the main floor, David braced himself. Then it happened. Rows upon rows of motorcycles stretched across the space, stacked and scattered like a mechanical avalanche. It wasn't just 1 or 2 brands, it was everything. Yamaha, Harley-Davidson, BSA, Honda, Triumph. Every decade, every size, every style. But there was one more level above, and what waited on the 3rd floor would rewrite everything they thought they had discovered so far. Look, we spent a lot of time tracking down court records and newspaper archives to piece together this 60-year story that almost nobody remembers. You now have the complete timeline of how America's greatest motorcycle collection was built and why it was destroyed. If this level of investigation into forgotten automotive history is valuable to you, hit subscribe. We dig this deep into every story we tell. The Mechanical Archaeology. What David encountered on the top floor defied reason. It was chaos and order fused into a single overwhelming vision. Motorcycles resting on sagging plywood, lined up like forgotten soldiers awaiting orders that would never come. Floorboards bowed beneath the weight. Some had already failed. Motorcycles had fallen through to the levels below, leaving jagged craters of splintered wood and twisted frames. Yet somehow, many still stood upright, their paint faded, their chrome scarred, but unmistakably intact. This was not just a collection, it was a living timeline of working-class motorcycle history. There were dirt bikes from the 1970s, cafe racers from the 1960s, clunky American cruisers from the 1950s. Not valuable in the auction house sense, but invaluable in their authenticity. These were the motorcycles that built a culture. Not pristine showpieces, but road-worn machines with scars that told stories. The building had become a kind of accidental museum. Moisture patterns etched deterioration into different sections of the floor. In some corners, you could still read the tank badges and see pinstriping. In others, frames had dissolved into rust sculptures. Every step forward threatened collapse. Every breath inhaled the smell of oil, wood rot, and forgotten ambition. David and his friends filmed everything they could, their excitement growing with each find. Yet questions hung in the air. Who owned this? Why had no one claimed it? And why was it all left here to rot in silence? As they were about to leave, something in the far corner of the third floor caught David's eye. A locked cabinet, sealed tight and clearly out of place. What they would discover inside wasn't just unexpected, it was disturbing. If you're serious about riding smart, grab the gear we trust. It's all linked in the description. The Motorcycle Whisperer. Walter Kohl was born on June 11, 1918 in South Lockport, New York. His grandfather, Albert Kohl, had arrived from Germany in 1869 and settled on farmland that would later become a mechanical empire. While his family worked the land for decades, Walter was drawn to something else: engines, frames, and the raw mechanics of motorcycles. By the early 1940s, Walter had begun what would become a 6-decade journey in the motorcycle business. The 1950 census listed him simply as a motorcycle dealer, but that barely scratched the surface. From 6955 South Transit Road, he built the region's oldest and largest authorized Yamaha dealership, while also creating something deeper, a space where broken motorcycles were restored and forgotten parts were preserved. Walter and his wife Anna were known for their no-nonsense approach. Dressed in overalls and welding torches in hand, they ran their business more like a workshop than a showroom. In 1964, Walter was selling new BSA and Moto Guzzi motorcycles, but his true passion was mechanical resurrection, bringing machines back from the brink when others had written them off. Walter had earned a reputation not just as a dealer, but as a motorcycle whisperer. The Golden Age and Growing Pains. By 1965, Walter's business had expanded beyond dealership norms. He was acquiring motorcycles from other failing shops, accepting unusual trade-ins, and storing more machines than he could maintain. What started as a shop became a salvage yard. Parts museum and repair facility rolled into one. Outside the shop, used bikes filled a muddy field. Summers were manageable, but winters battered the collection. His philosophy was different from modern retail strategies. He did not believe in quick turnover. If a part might one day help another rider, he kept it. His yard became a sanctuary of mechanical memory, with motorcycles from across eras and continents stacked and stored in every direction. They did not entertain casual buyers or bargain hunters. If you knew what you were looking for and showed respect for the machines, they would open the gates to rare parts and deep knowledge. That exclusivity made them a legend among serious riders. Local motorcyclists made regular pilgrimages to his shop. British bike owners found hard-to-source wiring looms. Harley riders tracked down chrome accessories long discontinued. And Japanese motorcycle fans uncovered early model components few even remembered existed. Yet the flood of motorcycles never slowed. His property was filling to the point of crisis. His dream of preserving motorcycle history was colliding with growing concern from town officials, and their patience was wearing thin. Fire, failure, and moving mountains. On March 4, 1970, disaster struck. A warehouse fire on Walter's property caused damages exceeding $100,000. Flames engulfed motorcycles and irreplaceable parts. The blaze wasn't just financial loss, it was cultural devastation. Without his primary building, Walter had nowhere to move his surviving inventory. Motorcycles were left outside, and what had once looked like a museum now resembled a junkyard. Soon after, the town of Lockport cited him for maintaining an illegal salvage operation. Where officials saw blight, Walter saw heritage. The legal system disagreed. Walter pleaded guilty and was placed on probation. Still, the core issue remained unresolved. Inventory overflowed and further citations followed. In 1971, he was arrested again. A jail sentence was issued but later suspended. He relocated operations to 47 Richmond Avenue within the city of Lockport. The new location gave him more space and fewer zoning headaches. It was both a retreat and a fresh start, a way to keep his work alive without further battles with local regulators. The move didn't end the story. In fact, it marked the beginning of the most important chapter. Because just down the canal from his new shop stood a building that would change everything. The Stone Building. The Stone Building at 71 Gooding Street, built in 1875, became Walter's final stronghold. Unlike his previous properties, this space offered industrial-scale storage, solid floors, thick walls, and room for thousands of parts and bikes. It was the culmination of his lifelong vision, a place where motorcycle history could be organized and protected from weather, theft, and regulation. Walter continued acquiring surrounding buildings along Richmond Avenue, expanding his footprint. Most of those structures are gone now, but the Gooding Street building endured. Inside, motorcycles were categorized across multiple levels. Rare Japanese, British, and American bikes were sorted with care. For the first time in years, his collection had room to breathe. By the late 1990s, age began to slow him down. On May 7, 2002, Walter Kohl passed away at 83 years old. In death, he reflected the same values he lived by. He donated his body to the University at Buffalo School of Medicine, ensuring even in the end he could still teach and give back. His passing left behind a staggering inheritance. Inside the Gooding Street warehouse remained hundreds of motorcycles and countless parts. Decades of labor and obsession, now without a steward. The family chose to hold on to the building, but what they didn't know was that a bureaucratic storm was coming, one that would turn Walter's preserved empire into a decaying secret that the motorcycle world would one day rediscover. The Heir and the impossible burden. Frank Merle believed he was purchasing a motorcycle business when he took over Walter Kohl's operation in the late 1990s. What he actually inherited was a bureaucratic nightmare. The Stone Building at 71 Gooding Street came with hundreds of motorcycles, thousands of parts, and a rising property tax bill that quickly outpaced the revenue he could generate from selling salvage. The timing worked against him. Online platforms like eBay were upending how vintage parts were bought and sold, reducing the need for regional salvage yards. Meanwhile, vintage motorcycle prices were rising, making it harder for Frank to acquire new inventory at affordable prices. His income shrank, but the tax burden didn't. Assessors valued the property based on size and commercial potential, not the aging structure or inconsistent income. It was a formula that left Frank stuck. Rather than negotiate, he simply stopped paying. His decision wasn't surrender, it was protest. He believed the system was rigged against operations like Walter's. Frank's refusal to pay property taxes left the building in legal limbo. On paper, he remained the owner. In reality, the unpaid taxes gave the city growing leverage. Inside the locked stone building sat the mechanical legacy of Walter Kohl, abandoned not out of carelessness but in quiet resistance to a system that didn't understand what it was destroying. The standoff was about to break. What began as a tax dispute would soon become a municipal seizure and unleash a bureaucratic chain reaction that threatened to erase everything. Municipal negligence and historical ignorance. In the year 2008, the city of Lockport took control of 71 Gooding Street for unpaid taxes. Officials treated it as a simple real estate transaction. What they overlooked was that the building was filled with one of the largest vintage motorcycle collections in the country. The city had not acquired just brick and stone, it had inherited a forgotten museum. No one was allowed inside. Hundreds of motorcycles left behind and out of reach sat silently as water leaks, temperature swings, and time accelerated their decay. The city viewed the contents as irrelevant. To them, this was about clearing blight, not preserving legacy. The State Historic Preservation Office intervened, pushing to save the 19th century stone building. Their intent was noble, but the result was disastrous. Preservation rules blocked demolition, yet provided no funding or urgency for interior recovery. The motorcycles continued to rot, caught in a regulatory standoff where no one had the tools or the will to act. Access to the building now required navigating multiple layers of bureaucracy, including liability reviews, insurance filings, and city approvals. Even Frank, the former owner, could not legally enter. Interested collectors had no way to inspect or purchase anything. It was a vault of history sealed by red tape. But a legal opportunity was approaching, one that might allow Frank and others to get back inside. The question was whether it would come in time. The legal victory and logistical nightmare. Frank's legal battle with the city was about more than property. It was about the motorcycles inside. After years of silence, a court ruled that although the city owned the building, Frank retained ownership of the contents. It was a critical win. He now had the legal right to re-enter and remove anything he could carry out. There was just one problem. The court gave him a strict deadline. By mid-November of 2010, Frank had to extract everything he wanted. The time window was short, the task massive. Hundreds of motorcycles lay across 3 deteriorating floors. Some were wedged between debris, others had partially collapsed with the building around them. Any motorcycle that had sat untouched for decades would not move easily. Many had seized wheels, rusted parts, or collapsed frames. Just loading one onto a trailer required effort. Loading dozens required planning, manpower, and the right tools. The building itself was now dangerous. Stairs groaned, floorboards buckled, and mold crept through every room. This wasn't just a cleanup, it was a rescue mission. That was when David Cuff returned. His earlier discovery of the building had made him one of the few outsiders familiar with its layout and contents. Now he came back not as an explorer, but as a rescuer, prepared to save whatever could still be saved. The countdown had begun. But David and Frank had no idea how unstable the building had become, or how little time they truly had. The Great Salvage Operation. David Cuff arrived in Lockport with a trailer, friends, and a plan. The mission was clear: salvage every part, frame, and motorcycle possible before the court deadline arrived. It was one of the most intense motorcycle recoveries in American history. The stakes were high, the building fragile, and the time vanishing. Each floor of the stone building had decayed further since David's first visit. Rainwater poured through the roof, eroding support beams. Some motorcycles had already fallen through the floor, others leaned at dangerous angles. The team moved carefully, avoiding structural weak points while identifying bikes that could still be saved. They worked in shifts. Bikes were pulled from debris, parts were loaded into bins, and everything was carted out under relentless pressure. It wasn't a methodical recovery. It was triage. There was no time for labeling, cleaning, or cataloging. Anything left behind would be scrapped. Among the chaos, Frank shared memories. He recalled when the shop had thrived, when 600 motorcycles once stood outside waiting for customers. Now, each frame pulled from the building felt like a memory unearthed. David's team wasn't just salvaging machines, they were restoring fragments of a lost culture. Every hour counted. The operation was saving more than expected, yet they knew they couldn't get everything. Some bikes were too buried, some floors too dangerous. They had done what they could, but something was about to happen. Something none of them had prepared for. The Final Catastrophe. On July 30th, 2013, everything that remained of Walter Kohl's legacy went up in flames. The fire that destroyed the stone building at 71 Gooding Street wasn't an accident. Witnesses saw 3 teenagers fleeing as the structure burned, ending decades of preservation in a single act of mindless destruction. The bikes David and Frank had not been able to save were incinerated in hours. This was more than arson. It was the erasure of a mechanical time capsule. Walter had spent 60 years building something unique, and in one night, vandals who understood nothing of its value destroyed it all. The fire devoured motorcycles, parts, and the final connection between generations of American riders. What had once been a living record of motorcycle evolution now smoldered beneath rubble and ash. The city's failure to secure the condemned building created the conditions for this disaster. Years of bureaucratic delay, regulatory impasse, and neglect had turned the site into a magnet for trouble. The municipal seizure that was supposed to protect the community had done the opposite, leaving behind a fire trap filled with irreplaceable history. Insurance assessments couldn't measure the real loss. What burned wasn't just steel and rubber, it was a monument to working-class ingenuity, now reduced to scorched remains. In its place stood only a cautionary tale. The fire closed the door on a mechanical empire, but what it sparked in the motorcycle community would ensure Walter's name wouldn't vanish with the smoke. What the market lost. The fire didn't just destroy motorcycles, it wiped out millions of dollars in market value and vaporized machines that had become nearly impossible to find. Frank remembered the days when 600 motorcycles sat in his yard, many from the 1960s and early 1970s. Today, those same bikes are sought after at auctions and collector shows, commanding values their original owners could never have imagined. Classic machines like the 1968 BMW R60 US may fetch $9,000. Rare examples like the R50/2 can command $16,000 or more. Condition, originality, and rarity all factor into these valuations, precisely the elements Walter had preserved. Yet many of these bikes were burned before they could even be cataloged. Walter's collection had incredible potential. Unrestored, original condition motorcycles are now the most valuable class among vintage collectors. They tell authentic stories, unaltered by restoration shortcuts or aftermarket parts. In the right hands, even rusty frames could have been rebuilt or donated rare components to similar models. But emergency salvage left no time for that level of assessment. During Walter's lifetime, motorcycles were tools. When they broke down, they were often junked. Only in hindsight did they become prized artifacts. By the time the market recognized their true worth, most of Walter's were gone, first to time, then to fire. The very market that would now treasure Walter's machines did not exist when they could have been saved. What survived became treasure. What burned became legend. As the collection reveals more of its secrets, it's clear that some pieces of history are meant to be preserved. What do you think? Let us know in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe. We're bringing more hidden stories and discoveries straight to your feed. The ghost stories and moving forward. Today, 71 Gooding Street is just an empty lot. The stone building is gone, but the motorcycles that once filled its floors live on, in fragments, restorations, and stories passed between riders. David and Frank saved what they could. Those survivors now rest in garages and museums across the country, still echoing with the spirit of the man who saved them. Many collectors who've heard the Lockport story express heartbreak. They recognize the tragedy not just in the fire, but in the failure to act sooner. Each lost bike is a missed chance to preserve a piece of working-class history, a machine that once mattered to someone, now remembered only in charred outlines and grainy photos. Yet some bikes escaped the flames. Some were rebuilt. Others gave life to different restorations. In those machines, Walter's legacy endures. Not in marble halls or government files, but in fuel tanks, pistons, and hand-polished chrome. They roll on, powered not only by gasoline, but by gratitude. Motorcycle museums now display a few pieces from Lockport, finally giving Walter's work the recognition it deserved, while inspiring collectors everywhere to think beyond ownership toward stewardship. Walter Kohl's empire didn't die in the fire, it spread, and thanks to passionate riders like David Cuff, the machines that couldn't be saved became legends reborn on the open road. What started as an accidental museum has become a symbol of how easy it is to lose something truly irreplaceable. So what's next? Help keep these stories alive. Comment below with your thoughts, give this video a thumbs up, and subscribe for more deep dives into the stories that time tried to forget.